All right, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, John Iacoletti.
Hey.
Yay. It is Sunday, March 12th, 2017. Just for the guys in the booth, I can still see the edge of that window. We got an awesome hum to show that this is actually live and we're flying by the seat of our pants. Yeah, that one right there. Hey, that's funny. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's cool on our monitor in here. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Good to be back.
There's been a bunch of stuff going on. I was off last week. My folks came down and visited. We had a great time. A couple of announcements about upcoming events for me, and I'll get through it quick so that this isn't the Let's Promote Matt show. Next weekend, I will be in Nashville for NanoCon, which is the Nashville Nuns. So just do a Google search for NanoCon.
Not the nuns that wear habits.
No, the N-O-N-E nuns, as in no religious preference or no religious association. I'll be doing the keynote address for the convention and a debate Sunday night at Austin Peay University. I've actually debated there before. Last time it was, I've forgotten already. It doesn't matter. But Sunday night, you can find the information if you just search for NanoCon. April 2nd, which is 3 weekends from now, I will be in Vancouver, British Columbia again, in the same place that Dawkins and I did our discussion. I will be doing a sit-down discussion with James Randi, the amazing Randi, covering magic and skepticism, talking a little bit about his life and his interactions with skepticism, both of our thoughts on this, and what role magic should or shouldn't play in investigations of the paranormal, etc. And that evening, I'll be part of a 4-man magic show in Vancouver. It's a separate event at a separate facility with James Randi, myself. I don't know how that happened, but I'm loving it. Camilo Dominguez and Sean Farquhar, the 2-time world champion of magic. So if you like, good magic and you're in or around Vancouver, that'll be an awesome evening. And I go back to Canada, I believe in June, in Toronto to do another sit-down discussion with Lawrence Krauss. He's going to give a talk, and then the two of us are going to sit down and chat and answer questions. And then there's, all the normal stuff on the weekends when I'm here. I'll be here at the Atheist Experience, which, by the way, this is a live, formerly public access, but now internet-based show, sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can find out more about the ACA at atheist-community.org, and you can find out more about this show at atheist-experience.com. We are live pretty much every Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Central or so. The clock's moved forward today, so I'm wondering if like an hour from now there will be people showing up, go, oh my gosh, somehow they made it through most of the day without advancing their clocks. But yes, it is now 16:34 Central Daylight Time here in Texas.
And I will be appearing nowhere.
You will be appearing here.
Except here.
And it's, it's pretty much a requirement. John is here to keep me from exploding. His mellow, like 60s Beatles inspired energy. We don't have a guru. Don't buy into that stuff at all. But so yeah, this show we talk a little bit about what people believe and why. We try to have theists call in, as that's the primary focus of the show. But we also speak to atheists, and we speak to theists of all different stripes. They're Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus. I'd love to get somebody, a Scientologist, to call in. Unfortunately, that's really unlikely to happen, which is strange because I think one of the very first shows I did a dozen years ago or so was on Scientology. The very first one I did was an accident, and we talked about the Supreme Court decision regarding Ten Commandments monuments. And then the next time I filled in, I think I did a whole show on, here's what's wrong with Scientology. Of course, you have better access to better information now with people like Leah Remini producing her series, talking about her time in and the transition out. I know Ron Miscavige, who is David Miscavige's father, is out of Scientology now and doing a bunch of interviews. I know I heard the other day that my friend Seth Andrews from Thinking Atheist is going to be interviewing Ron for that program. And in September, when I'm at the Mythicist Milwaukee convention, Ron will be there as well, and I'm going to sit down and have a discussion with him for the Atheist Debates Project. So we'll at least get to dance around Scientology a bit. I don't know if is anything we were supposed to announce on behalf of the ACA.
I couldn't think of anything. The back cruise is still a ways off, but that'll be September 23rd here in Austin. That's our annual event. It's lots of fun. So pencil that in anyway. We haven't announced a special guest yet, but that'll be coming shortly.
Cool.
And
there are a number of other efforts that you can participate with if you're in the Austin area, including Atheists Helping the Homeless, Humanists at Work, a number of things that aren't tied directly to the ACA, but they are community service and outreach opportunities. And I know that Austin Oasis has just started up. I haven't had a chance to go yet. Hopefully I'll be in town for a weekend and can go out and visit that. And I expect, I know there's going to be elections for the ACA coming up soon and some discussion about other events. But because we don't have a topic for today, I wanted to go ahead and get straight to callers. And up first, we've got Stephanie in Tampa. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I know that there's a question here, and I will, of course, get to your question and let you ask whatever you wanted or talk about that. But there's one thing that I wanted to get out of the way first for clarity, because it seems that you and I perhaps got off on the wrong foot.
Yes, I think so.
Because
I think we can turn that around.
I woke up to some tweets, a barrage of tweets, one might say, being directed at me. And one of them was, you claimed that you were writing a rebuttal to something I'd said at my blog, except I don't have a blog. And
Right. You said it was a wiki.
Then I realized that you were talking about Iron Chariots. And then I pointed out that the things that you were replying to weren't necessarily things that I had written at Iron Chariots, because
I know you didn't want to take credit for them. I don't blame you.
Well, you don't. Okay, you don't. You've said that on Twitter as well. Like you have this idea that I don't want to take credit for them. Of course I don't. Somebody else wrote it. I believe they should get credit for their work. But you portrayed this as me disassociating myself or denouncing the wiki, and that's not true. That was just me clarifying that you're basically announcing that you're rebutting me when in fact you're rebutting somebody else.
Well, maybe it would be nice if you had the authors cite their names on wiki so I could give them all credit for everything that they've written.
Well, you do know that it's a wiki, and you can go to the history page and you can see who made what edits. I think there's a problem with just assuming that because I created a wiki a dozen years ago that I wrote everything on it. As a matter of fact, I wrote only a tiny portion of it, and some of that's been edited as well. So to be clear, I'm not disassociating myself from it. I'm not denouncing it. It may be that the arguments that you wrote rebuttals to are things that I perhaps agree with. I just don't want to be given credit. And I don't understand this need to keep going, I'm rebutting Matt Dillon, because I'm irrelevant. The arguments are either correct or incorrect, independent of who said them, right?
Well, the arguments are always the same arguments.
I don't know. I don't know how that actually addresses
you and Bertrand Russell and all the different people. So.
Okay, I don't know how that's relevant to the point, but so at least do we acknowledge that you're running around saying you're rebutting me when in fact you aren't?
Well, here's what I can do. I'll change the rebuttal to say instead of rebutting you, I'll say I'm rebutting the Iron Chariots wiki page. How about that? Would that work out fine? See,
and that's perfectly fine, because you also went back when you were trying to tie me to Iron Chariots and found a 10-year-old bio from the Atheist Community of Austin. It's not your fault that it hadn't been updated, but it made me kind of at least somewhat question what the goals were here. Because when I take an argument for the existence of God that somebody's presented, I either clearly identify who wrote this particular version I'm talking about, or I just ignore that and focus on the content. Because it doesn't matter to me whether you said it or William Lane Craig said it or Irenaeus said it or St. Anselm wrote it. It's the content of the argument. That stands or falls independent of who it is.
Okay.
That's correct, I'm assuming, right?
Well, the content of the argument certainly is important.
Why would it remotely be relevant who said it? How does that affect the content?
I'm just trying to figure out why you keep disassociating yourself from this wiki page. I don't understand. I mean, you put it on your bio, you put a link to it on your bio, and then you said you haven't looked at it in years. I mean, it seems kind of unusual to put something on your bio that you haven't actually looked at in years.
Here's the thing, Stephanie. You found a bio from 10 years ago or more.
Why would you have it posted on the internet, a bio from 10 years ago?
I don't run that page from the Atheist Community of Austin. Did you perhaps, and by the way, if you went to my Wikipedia page, that's more up to date. But you have once again claimed that I'm disassociating myself from Iron Chariots when I just explained to you that that's not the case.
You don't want to. This is very amusing to me because you basically have a link, an old bio with an old link. Apparently, you haven't looked at it in 10 years.
Some website
that credits these other authors on Wiki. I have no problem doing that. I'll find all the other authors and find all the other links.
You do realize, Stephanie, that even 10 years ago, when that bio was new, that it didn't in any way suggest that I wrote everything at Iron Chariots, right? You do understand what a wiki is.
I understand that, especially I'm sure that you're trying to disassociate yourself from the webpage that says, I don't know. I mean, there's an entire webpage to explain
Stephanie,
the words, I don't know. I mean, obviously that's the answer that you guys have for every argument that's out there, whether it's a teleological argument, a cosmological argument. It's always, I don't know.
What's wrong with that?
After a while, cognitive dissonance would result.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know exactly what's wrong with the I don't know thing, but I would really like you to stop saying that I'm disassociating myself from something when I've expressly pointed out that I'm not. All I was doing was clarifying that your claim that I wrote something was factually incorrect. I do not know whether or not I agree or disagree with the content that you're rebutting. I don't know if perhaps I think it's a great argument or a mediocre argument. We're not in, I haven't even looked at this stuff, and yet you're claiming that I'm disassociating, and all I'm doing is saying, you claimed I wrote something, I'm pointing out I didn't.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So what was it you wanted to talk about?
Well, I just want to thank you first for bringing me on the show. I know that we did get off on the wrong foot, and there's been some tweets that have gone back and forth that weren't in the friendliest tone. It's in some ways. So I do want to thank you for having me on the show. And I have a number of atheist friends on Twitter, and that's actually how I found out about your show. And so they have been recommending that I get on the show, I think because they want to watch me get pummeled by you. So I'll just put it up there that that's what they're hoping to watch. They've all got popcorn out now and they're listening and hoping that I get a good pummeling. So we have that coming.
Well, we'll see what we do. It's not always my... So big thing is that my goal here is to actually talk about the arguments, talk about what people believe, why they believe it, and then point out why I do or don't agree. There are people who view some of that as a pummeling. There are people who feel that, you're just... So one of the biggest, most common complaints that I get is, why do you only let the ridiculous people call in? And when I get that in email, I'm like, okay, well then why don't you call in? Or why don't you have your pastor call in? Or why don't you recommend your favorite, apologist call in? Because I'm not picking who calls in. Anybody can dial the phone number and theists get priority. So... But there was an issue or a question that you had or something you wanted to address?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about early Christians.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you what you thought about the early Christians, and especially the apostles and the other early disciples of Christ who were so brave at the time and were willing to take being stoned. They were willing to be tortured, put in jail. Perpetua, which was one of the first martyrs, basically had written up an account of that, and there's a number of others who've written up accounts of sort of the way that they were treated by Nero. And so I wanted to ask you what you thought drove them to be so brave.
Well, I think that most of them were probably convinced that that their beliefs were correct. But the willingness to be brave or even be hurt or killed for your beliefs doesn't tell us anything at all about whether or not your beliefs are true or likely to be true. There are, I've watched Buddhists set themselves on fire. There are people who tragically flew planes into buildings based on at least in part, some of their religious doctrines. But at the end of the day, my concern is whether or not are they correct in their beliefs? And the truth about whether or not they're correct isn't impacted in any way by the number of people who believe something or how passionately they believe it or what they're willing to put up with. There are people who are willing to put up with a lot and die, and it doesn't mean that they are dying for a lie. They might be dying for an error.
Okay, fair enough. So let me build on that. And so we'll go back to the story of the apostles. And if you take a look at the apostles, initially Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. The apostles were in hiding. And if they had not seen Jesus, they wouldn't have come out of hiding. There have been many traditions, and there have also been documents of the apostles and others, early Christians such as Stephen, dying gory deaths. And others have seen Jesus. People saw Jesus People had seen Jesus rise, and had they not seen him rise, they wouldn't have been so brave.
Somebody saw Jesus. Somebody saw Jesus rise.
How many Buddhists saw anything? How many Muslims saw anything? The early apostles actually saw something, and that's what made them so brave.
So, first of all, you're saying the only reason they would have come out of hiding is if they'd seen Jesus. I don't know how you reached that conclusion. Second of all, you said
exactly. Why else would they have come out of hiding?
Well, that's an argument from ignorance fallacy. You don't get just
no, it's not. No, it's not an argument from ignorance.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Stephanie, Stephanie, if your claim
from hiding because they had seen something.
Stephanie,
it's very, very clear. Why?
Oh
did
my
they get so
God,
brave?
Stephanie, you claimed the only reason they would come out is if they'd seen Jesus, and when I asked you what your justification for that was, you literally said, why else would they come out? That is by definition. That is by definition. By definition, an argument from ignorance fallacy.
Fallacy. The only fallacy you should be concerned about.
Do you care about logical fallacies? Do you care about making a sound argument?
Logical fallacy is the cognitive dissonance you must be having when you don't realize why the apostles got so brave.
Stephanie, that's not my question. Do you care? Do you understand that a fallacious argument cannot be demonstrated to be correct? That is what a fallacy is.
You can try to capture this as if it's a fallacy. This is not a fallacy.
So first of all, it is, but that's not my question, Stephanie.
And that's how they were able to convince millions of people to
Are you capable of answering the actual question? Are you capable of answering the actual question I asked instead of going on defensive and redirecting to something else?
No, because you're redirecting.
You're not capable of doing that? You're not capable of actually answering the...
You are redirecting, Matt.
I'm not redirecting. I'm asking you.
Yes, you are. I asked the question.
All right, your ass is on hold so that you don't talk over me. I will take you off in just a moment. All I've asked that I'd like an answer to is, do you understand that a logically fallacious argument cannot be demonstrated to be true? Doesn't mean it's not, that the conclusion isn't true. It just means that you have no good reason to...
Relevant to the current question.
You were still talking to... I'm the one who...
It's not relevant to the current issue. It's not a logically fallacious argument.
Stephanie, I'm asking a question. You can say it's not relevant all you want, but it's my show, and I'm asking it...
You're trying to shift the goalposts there, Matt.
No, I'm trying to find out if I'm talking to someone who is willing to base arguments in reason, or if they're just going to make assertions and dismiss fallacies.
Matt, you're not making any sense. Think about this. The apostles were in hiding. They feared for their lives. Why do you think they came out?
Maybe they got hungry.
Why do you think they were so brave? Peter was hung upside down. Why do you think Paul was so brave?
I already explained,
on the road
Stephanie.
To Damascus, he would not have been so brave, and he wouldn't have written at least 6 of the New Testament books.
How do you know any of this?
I already explained that I'm fine with the idea that they were sincerely convinced they were correct. What I asked was, do you understand that an argument that is logically fallacious, the conclusion cannot be considered reasonably to be true?
You're trying to wrap my
If you don't answer my question, I swear I will hang up on you because you are wasting time.
Of course I'm wasting time.
Not anymore, you're not. Not anymore. This is one of the common questions that I get when I'm traveling around and people talk about, how do you engage with believers? What do you do when someone refuses to accept reason as a foundation? That's what you do. You set aside the entire topic of discussion because Jesus is irrelevant to logic. The specifics of any argument for something is irrelevant with respect to whether or not we begin with a foundation of reason. There is incredibly, the reason that we begin with an understanding of let's not make fallacious arguments is because there's a logical structure, a syllogistic structure. And there are 256 different ones, which Aristotle and his band of merry logicians went through and analyzed to show that of these 256, these particular structures are such that a true premise necessarily leads to a true conclusion. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. That structure, no matter what you put in there, as long as your premises are true, the structure guarantees that your conclusion is true. And more accurately, if you accept the premises, you must accept the conclusion, otherwise you are by definition being irrational. You are just denying the conclusion. The structure of the argument goes to its validity. The content of the argument goes to whether or not it's sound. And so you could have an argument that is valid in structure, but if you plug in a premise that isn't true, then you have no reason to think that your conclusion is true. Okay? And so if your premise is the only reason, or your conclusion is the only reason they would come out of hiding was because they saw the risen Jesus, in a discussion about why they did certain things, you're not even making an argument, you're just making an assertion. And when I try to point this out and you say, well, what other reason could there be? That is by definition a fallacy. That is, hey, the butler did it. Well, what evidence do you have that the butler did it? Well, who else could have done it? That is the fallacy that Stephanie's engaged in. And my only reason for addressing that was so that we could actually talk about the content that we perhaps disagree on. But Stephanie begins with this idea of there were these people who believed and they were willing to die for their beliefs, and the only thing that would make them come out of hiding was if they actually saw the risen Jesus. That is a bald assertion that you have no evidence. Well, it's common sense. Well, it's common sense to you, but that's because you don't understand the importance of avoiding fallacious reasoning. Your common sense is flawed. You have been duped into thinking things are reasonable when they're not. Reasonableness is demonstrated, not asserted. But let's say that these apostles believed these things, and then they also believed that they saw the risen Jesus and this brought them out of hiding. Does that tell us that they actually did see a risen Jesus, or just that they were convinced of it? Or, and this is the damning thing that we didn't get to, how do you know, as John was asking, any of that happened? You have a book that claims it happened. You have stories of translations of stories that were written by people who had an intent and a goal of convincing you of the truth of this. So I might say, to use one of Stephanie's favorite arguments, that aspects of this story were intentionally constructed to make it appear more convincing and weren't actually tied to the truth of the events. Oh, the apostles were in hiding and they came out. That's exactly what you'd write if you wanted to convince somebody. Now, it's an awful argument. It's just as bad as hers, because now I'm claiming that I have an explanation. The truth is, I don't know, which I know just frustrates Stephanie to no end. Oh, the Iron Chariots Wikipedia has an entry on I don't know as an answer. Yeah, do you know why it's there? I haven't even read it. But I'm guessing that it's there because I don't know is entirely frustrating to theists. They arrogantly presume that not only should they know, but that in fact they do know, and that they've come to the right answer and they can't be fooled. And it's really frustrating when skeptics, when they're asked, hey, what explanation do you have for this? And we say, I don't know. I don't even have the facts. What you've shown me is a book. You haven't shown me the corroboration to show that this actually happened. This goes back to the debate that I did 2 weeks ago, and after this we'll get to another caller, on the resurrection of Jesus. My opponent presented 2 lines of evidence to defend his position that Jesus rose from the dead. The first line of evidence was a bunch of arguments that the supernatural is real. All of his claims were flawed. They were bald assertions that you couldn't demonstrate, and you cannot conclude that the supernatural is real just because somebody thinks they saw a ghost. Similarly, you cannot conclude that Jesus rose from the dead just because somebody thinks they saw it, or worse, somebody writes a story that somebody thinks they saw it. His second line of evidence was, hey, there's historical evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. Well, that's the only part of his opening that was remotely relevant, and you know what that consisted of? Nothing. No physical evidence, no independent corroboration, The entirety of it was Paul believed, and other people believed Paul, and therefore we should consider this reasonable. It is a fallacy parade with theists, particularly with evangelical Christians, who are absolutely cocksure that they have the one and only right answer, so much that when you challenge them on why they believe it, their answer is inevitably, well, what else could it be? Well, congratulations. You've now removed yourself from reasoned discourse on this. There is no scientific discipline, there is no historical discipline that would ever occur where you would walk in and give your paper to say, I think that the best explanation is this, and when somebody says, what evidence do you have for that? You say, what else could it be? You get nowhere that way. And the fact that you don't recognize this is part and parcel of the foundation of why you wanted to mock on Twitter. Oh, all you atheists, you just keep saying, I don't know, I don't know. All the arguments are the same that come from Bertrand Russell, etc. First of all, I'm not presenting arguments that God doesn't exist. I'm exposing flaws in the arguments that God does exist. Your failure to meet your burden of proof, your utter reliance on argument from ignorance fallacies, your incredible, almost impossibly difficult, the difficult time you have with saying, I don't know, when that may in fact be the correct answer, those three things combined serve as the foundation of your religious beliefs. And the proof is, if you had evidence and you cared about logical argument, when I asked you that, you would have said, of course I care about logical arguments. Of course I understand why fallacious arguments shouldn't be presented. And yes, as a matter of fact, I do have evidence. But you don't. And your brain put you in defensive mode and you made a fool of yourself.
Sometimes I don't know is the only honest answer.
How do you know that? I'm sorry, I was channeling Cy for just a second.
Yeah, it's not a virtue to claim you know something that you don't have any good reason to know. And I don't know is sometimes the best answer you can hope for, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous, this idea that I don't know is somehow a weaker position than I do know, when you can't support it. So, for her to mock that is just it's posturing.
Yeah, it's along those lines. We've got Gabriel in Pennsylvania. Thanks for waiting through my rant and the first caller.
Hi, yes. My name is Gabriel from Pennsylvania.
Hi, Gabriel.
How you guys doing? This is my first time calling. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's okay.
Don't be. I'll let John answer you, and that'll take all of the heavy-hitting stuff off the table because he's so nice.
It's not about. No. Okay, this is my issue. I'm between being. I'm a Christian right now, but I've read and seen the evidence for evolution, and then I'm starting to question my Christianity, and I'm leaning towards being an agnostic or atheist. But what keeps bringing me back to the fact that there might be a God somewhere is superstition. I'm African raised, from Africa,
mm-hmm.
and in Africa, this is dominant there. The superstitious things are very dominant. Now, let me be very specific in terms of voodoo and black magic. Now, I've seen things being done to people that, if superstitious things didn't exist, this thing shouldn't be happening to people. I'll give an example. I had a friend his family was really struggling financially. The dad did everything they could to make ends meet, but they couldn't. Things weren't working out for them. And he told me this personally, that the family went to consult a voodoo priest, and the voodoo priest did some rituals for them. And a couple of months later, they were very wealthy. I mean, they bought a new mansion in Africa. They had cars. I'm like, wow, And there's many instances for this. So I'm going back and saying, wow. So if a God doesn't exist, how are things like this possible? If superstitious things doesn't exist, I mean, I don't have any evidence there's no evidence to show that, the only evidence is that they weren't poor, all of a sudden they are rich. How do you explain something like this? Like, how
Why?
is that?
So this is exactly the same as the last call. So you have something happened, and your argument or your position is essentially, how do you explain that without with anything other than a God?
I'm not saying that that's the reason why there should be a God, but if things, like, how can someone not have a job and still be driving and living in mansions and affording stuff?
I don't know. Did you talk to them and find out where their money came from?
Exactly, from the rituals that the voodoo priest did.
So you think rituals just produced money, like out of thin air?
No, so,
Well, the money still came from somewhere, right? It didn't just appear.
Exactly, but it's not coming from his probably hard work or anything like that, like people working hard to get.
So the question is, how do you find out, how do you reach a conclusion about where the money came from?
Of course, they have to come from a bank or something like that. I do know that. But what I'm saying is that hadn't they gone to that voodoo priest, they'll still be in that situation and, being in a poor situation. So until then, when they went to the voodoo priest and they did rituals, then things change.
Yeah, but why? Why did things change?
Exactly. That's what, I don't know why. I don't know. They have.
I don't know why. I don't know why either. What reason do you have to think that God or something supernatural is even a possible explanation for this?
That's what I'm saying. Before everything else, nothing changed except that until that ritual was done. Don't you think there's something somewhere? Like, at least, like, let's just say we are dependent on evidence, right? But for some reason we don't have evidence, but we can see a change.
Okay. Then in that situation, the only reasonable answer is I don't know.
There's no particular reason to think that whatever the voodoo priest did had anything to do with.
I understand that I don't know what happened or what was done, but to me, like, because of that, I can't just dismiss that nothing superstitious doesn't exist because there's no evidence for it.
So
to me,
nobody,
like that,
Gabriel, stop. Nobody is saying that you should conclude that nothing supernatural or superstitious exists. That's not the conclusion. The conclusion is, I don't have an explanation for this. Your conclusion is not, therefore there's no God. The atheist position is not, we have concluded there are no gods, and that's not it. The position, the properly skeptical position, is that the supernatural doesn't exist until there's actual evidence for it. And in order for that to be the case, you'd have to define it, and you'd have to show it interacts with reality. You'd have to have some way of testing it and demonstrating a connection between the two. Until that happens, there's no reason to think that the supernatural exists. It is essentially the null hypothesis that nothing supernatural exists, or nothing exists, natural or supernatural, until it is demonstrated to exist. And so when you run across this, the fact that somebody, hey, on that day that they went and talked to the voodoo priest, what else did they do that day?
In terms of?
Did they eat breakfast that day?
Of course, they probably did.
Okay. Why is it that you're tying this to a visit to the voodoo priest and not tying it to breakfast? Maybe their breakfast made them rich.
Because they always eat breakfast and nothing has changed.
What was there anything else different that they did that day?
I don't know what they did different, but based on what the voodoo priest did for them, and I showed them that what he has done.
What did the voodoo priest do for them? Because this is the problem.
I don't know. It's a ritual that he did. Rituals in Africa, when they do rituals, sometimes they slaughter animals, they present it to gods, and use it as an atonement for the gods to bring good wealth to people, and sometimes that causes things to change.
I'm fine with the idea that the voodoo priest did something, but what is the connection between what the voodoo priest did and what happened to them?
Exactly. If it didn't work, they only have got the money. And
You keep saying exactly when I ask a question.
No, I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming. I've seen most of your videos, and I do understand.
I don't think you do understand if you think it's likely that this is a demonstration of something supernatural.
He's just trying to walk you through the skeptical position, and that's to examine, okay, what's the situation? What happened that could have caused this result? And, you know, I would ask you, how do you know any of this happened? Is this a story you heard? Is this something?
This is a friend of mine that I know.
These are people you know. Okay, so
this is personal. That's why this is what I keep thinking about. That makes me not say, you know, I can't be an atheist because of that. Because I know the American culture doesn't see these things on a regular basis. But in Africa, you know, when someone tells you, you know, you better stop, you know, bugging me because I can go to this voodoo priest and make something happen to you. Immediately they stop because...
Okay, then have him go to the voodoo priest and make something happen to me.
I mean, you know, I don't believe in I don't try to get involved in those things because, like I said, you know, because sometimes there's consequences for all these things.
Yeah, you know what happens? You know, you say there's consequences, but you know what happens when you encourage people not to investigate something out of fear? You increase the likelihood that people will think it's plausible. If you couch something in mystery and fear, you can't properly investigate it. If this voodoo priest can make someone rich, that is testable. Let's get a whole bunch of different people. We'll go to the voodoo priest. We'll let him do his rituals, and we will see which ones of those people actually get rich. If he can consistently make people rich by sacrificing a chicken, and we can get enough information to show that there seems to be some kind of causal connection between these two, it's the same thing we've done for prayer. When we've tested prayer, we've tested intercessory prayer. We've had a bunch of people praying for specific individuals, and then you see whether or not they improve or not. And it turns out that prayer works at exactly the rate of chance, with the exception of when people know they're being prayed for, and then it works less.
But it's strange that, you know, like something like this, I know about prayer and I know about all those, you know, facts that you're talking about, you know, because I've read into it. But you know, that's why I'm trying to get some answers into this kind of things. And, you know, because, for instance, again, I'll give you this one last example. And, you know, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I had a friend over in this country, right, and he was with this girl, and they got a kid together. And for some, you know, later in the relationship, they broke up and stuff like that. And for some reason, this girl wanted to take the guy to court. I think it was child support or something like that, even though the guy was providing for them, but I think she wanted more money. So she planned to take him to court and everything like that. And the guy told her not to do that. He doesn't want the government taking his money and blah, blah, blah. So eventually the girl didn't agree. She said, I'm definitely taking you to court, making sure to get more money from you and stuff like that. She was deliberately going to do it. So he spoke to his brother back home in Africa, and his brother asked him, what piece of item of her do you still have with you? Oh, and he said, luckily he still had one of her shoes that she probably left in his house when they split up. And he said, just send me those shoes. So he mailed those shoes back to his brother back home in Africa. And what his brother did was that he took those shoes to a voodoo priest. And the voodoo priest did a ritual on those shoes. And when it came time for the day for them to show up to court, the lady didn't show up. Right?
So basically, if I send my shoe to a voodoo priest, he can make my alarm clock not go off?
No. This, like,
I'm intentionally mocking this because there's so these are stories. Okay. First of all, I have no idea for all I know, you could be making them up, or you could have heard them from somebody else who was making them up. But even just looking at the story, the fact that he sent off somebody's shoes and they didn't show up to court, there's no way to demonstrate a connection between those two events.
There could have been any number of reasons she didn't show up in court.
So for instance, if I say, okay, you know, I'm going to do this for you, and this is what's going to happen, and I do it, and those things happen, I'm trying to say...
Then we need to actually investigate a single instance. This is what the fake psychics and they're relying on. when we test them, they fail. The James Randi Educational Foundation for years had $1 million prize for anybody who could demonstrate any paranormal or supernatural event claim that they could do. And yet nobody ever even passed the preliminary examination, because as soon as you start testing this stuff, all of a sudden it fails. And so how many other people have gone to this voodoo priest and asked for something to happen and it didn't happen? If those stories aren't getting spread around, and the only stories that are getting spread around are the ones where it appears that something happened, then that is a confirmation bias.
I mean, you can speak to any African, and they'll tell you, ask them about black magic, voodooism. I mean,
okay.
There's even videos on the internet about people holding voodoo dolls and pinching the voodoo doll while it's affecting someone from somewhere.
You know, there are magic tricks that I've done that people think are supernatural. There are plenty of other magicians who are far more accomplished than I am who have done tricks that people would think are supernatural. It doesn't impress me to say, oh, you could go to Africa and there's all kinds of people that tell you what happened with black magic. Do you think it's the case that, why is it the case that it happens there in areas that are steeped in fear and an inability to investigate? Why isn't this stuff being investigated regularly and demonstrated to be true?
Because people think that they already see the results for it, so they don't have to investigate it. I mean, if someone says, you know, they can do this, and you go mad, and they've actually seen people that have gone mad from someone doing a ritual, no one is going to investigate that. What do you have to investigate? I mean, like, you know, someone says, I can do this, and this is what's going to happen.
So the problem, Gabriel, the problem here is that something happened and people reached a conclusion about why, and now they aren't open to questioning it.
I mean, what question is there when I said, I'll do this and this is what's going to happen?
The question is, did you actually do it, and how did you do it? How can we draw a connection between, you know, hey, look, I could make all kinds of claims. So, for example, I could say, tomorrow you're going to meet somebody new who's going to talk to you about a new job opportunity. Now, if that happens to you tomorrow, will you conclude that I'm psychic or have some way of predicting the future?
No, because you didn't say you're a psychic or you're a voodoo priest or something.
Okay, I'm a voodoo priest, and I'm telling you that tomorrow you're going to meet somebody who's going to talk to you about a new job opportunity. If you meet somebody tomorrow and they talk to you about a new job opportunity, are you reasonable in concluding that I am in fact a voodoo priest who can make those predictions?
No.
Then it's not true for the others as well.
I haven't come to you with any specific problem of mine. You just mentioned job opportunity. You know,
yeah.
So
we're getting nowhere.
I mean, I understand, and that's what I've tried. I think that, okay, like you said, science doesn't have any evidence, or there's no testable things to.
No, I didn't say that. I specifically talked about potential. Gabriel, no, stop. I specifically said that depending on the claims, there are ways to test this. We have, in fact, tested intercessory prayer and other things. I specifically asked, why do you think this hasn't been tested? And you're like, oh, these people just assume that there's a connection here. That's the problem. They should stop assuming and start investigating.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't need any extra examination to when someone says this is where we went and they did this in front of us and they said after doing this in a couple of weeks this is going to happen.
Yeah, then you are by definition not a skeptic, or not being skeptical and not being rational. You are willing to reach a conclusion about a connection between two things without sufficient investigation. And by the way, when I asked you, if I told you this was going to happen, and it happened, you wouldn't believe, which means that in addition, you just a minute ago said, hey, if somebody says they're going to do this and it happens, I don't need to investigate further. That's a lie, because when I asked you if I did that, you were not willing to
investigate further.
What?
How would we investigate further?
How would you investigate further? It depends on what is actually being claimed to do. If I can predict the future, it's really easy. We just start going through my predictions and seeing how many of them actually match up. And at the end of all this, if I'm able to predict with 90% confidence what's going to happen tomorrow, then we've demonstrated that I can apparently predict what will happen with 90% confidence. But you know what we haven't demonstrated? How I can do that. We haven't demonstrated whether it's supernatural, whether it's trickery. And yet you're willing to say that, oh, there's all these people running around who the voodoo guy tells them this, and it happens, and therefore it's real. You haven't sufficiently investigated that to reach the conclusion that you reached. And neither have they. Or at least we're unaware of any proper research.
Because, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. It's like you're taking a medication and it heals you. We can go to a lab and actually see those see what the mechanism of the drug does and causes you to be healed, or to be well, or to heal you from an infection. I do understand that fact. But again, like, I'm not saying you are saying this, but there's no like testable things in terms of superstition, because it doesn't apply to science. All we can see is
wrong
a change.
It's still testable. It's still testable. You can set up an experiment to show cause and effect without understanding the mechanism necessarily.
At a minimum, you can demonstrate correlation.
I mean, if I have $0 in my bank account and all of a sudden I say I'm rich, all we have to go and do is look at my bank account, correct?
Yeah, but the question is, how did you become rich?
Oh, this voodoo guy did some rituals for me.
How did you determine that what the voodoo guy did is what made you rich? There's a fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this, which is why I asked about breakfast. Just because something happens after breakfast doesn't mean that breakfast caused it. And just because something happens after you visit a witch doctor doesn't mean that the witch doctor or voodoo priest caused it.
Well, and either way, you're reacting to a story that you were told. Maybe the voodoo priest gave him a bunch of money, for all you know.
No, I'm not reacting to a story. This is things that happen. There are a lot of things that people. Like I said, this is something that if you're in an African culture, you understand. You will easily understand this because it happens before Christianity came to Africa.
The truth about the supernatural, you have no reason to think that it's cultural.
I mean, before Christianity came to Africa, Africans were practicing, their own culture, and the vast majority of their own culture was black magic and all that. That's how. When people went to wars, they used African wars. I'm talking about. They used black magic, the one with the most potent black magic.
Whoa. How did you determine that there's any such thing as potent black magic?
Because some were powerful than others.
Some were what?
Some of the culture, some of the black magics were powerful than others.
How do you determine that there's any such thing as powerful black magic?
Yeah, because people there are some things some people can claim to do, and some people cannot do that. Some voodoo priests cannot do certain things other voodoo priests claim they can do.
Where's the evidence that they've done anything?
People can claim anything they want to. It doesn't mean it's true.
That's why when you say evidence, the evidence is what we see in the neighborhood. Like I keep telling you, I can't go and test it in the science lab. All I see is that he wasn't rich. All of a sudden, he's rich, and he's not working. He doesn't have a good job to be rich, to be affording all those things.
Sure, and what I'm telling you is that someone who isn't rich, who becomes rich, does not in any way explain how they became rich.
I don't even think you can necessarily assume that he's rich just because he could have borrowed a bunch of money. How do you know he's rich? Did you look at his bank account?
Things, I think it's from a different cultural background. That's why you may not understand. But I do urge you to speak to Africans who know these things very well, and they'll tell you.
Why? Gabriel, what evidence can they possibly present of a connection? All they can do is tell me stories. This happened, and then this happened. I have no way of verifying that those things actually happened, and I don't have a way to demonstrate a connection between them.
That's why things don't just happen like that, right? Things don't just happen, right?
We're right back to the beginning with the fallacy of argument from ignorance.
Sometimes things do just happen.
Yeah, you don't think that people don't show up in court? I think it happens all the time here.
I mean, but I didn't even finish that story. Later on, she said, she never wanted to take him to court. How is it that someone who was willing to take someone to court all of a sudden has a change of heart? Something happened.
So people can't have a change of heart about whether or not they want to take somebody to court?
People do that all the time without voodoo black magic. Here.
I mean, I do understand where you're coming from. That's why I said you have to actually go to Africa.
No, you don't understand where I'm coming from, or there's no way the words "you have to go to Africa" could possibly come out of your mouth. You just,
exactly, because
you don't get to say exactly. We're done with that. You have to go to Africa.
That's special pleading.
Yeah.
Africa is not any different than anywhere else. You can either show that...
Well, even if it were, then people could go there and investigate.
Yeah.
But me going to Africa to hear stories about people who say, I went to the witch doctor and the next day this woman didn't show up in court, that's a waste of my time and money to go to Africa to hear stories like that. Plus, I can hear those stories without going to Africa. You can have everybody in Africa who has had an experience with a voodoo priest. Just set up a web forum, put one in the public square where they can all go in and here's my story. And at the end of the day, what you'll have is a whole bunch of stories. You won't necessarily have evidence of any sort of causal connection.
Well, and I would have been... That's why you have to investigate. You don't just say, "Oh, well, somebody told me this happened, and therefore it worked." I would talk to the woman and say, "Why didn't you come to court?" And I would talk to the priest and say, "What exactly did you promise to do? Did you say I will make sure that she doesn't show up in court, or did you say I will help your situation?"
Yeah.
And something vague like that, and then you interpret anything that happens as, well, he was right. He did it. He helped the situation. Well.
What I'd really like to do is to take all those people from Africa that you're referencing who believe that the voodoo priests have black magic that can actually affect things and have all of them call Stephanie and tell her their stories so that when she gets done explaining to them how they cannot reasonably reach that conclusion, she might come to understand how she cannot reasonably come to reach the conclusion she's reached. But on that note, we've got Jeff in Utah, a Mormon with a unique perspective for us.
Yes, hello. Am I on the air, sirs?
You are. You're on with John and Matt.
Hi, Jeff.
Oh, hi, John. Hi, Matt. The weather's lovely here. I'm from Oregon, but I moved to Utah about 6 years ago. And like most people who move to Utah, you meet the Mormons. Mm-hmm. And so, Mormon, it's almost a pejorative term. We like to be called members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yep.
Right.
Yes, sirs, that's correct. And about a year ago, I made a commitment to read the Book of Mormon. I'm sure you're familiar. In fact, the South Park creators even made a musical. And now, don't tell my bishop, but I even saw the musical prior to my becoming a Latter-day Saint. And
wait, you saw the musical before, and you read the Book of Mormon, and you're a Mormon?
Oh, yes, sir. And I noticed a difference. When I went to the Broadway show, I did not feel the Spirit of the Lord. But when I read the Book of Mormon, I felt the Spirit.
What's that feel like?
Well, most Mormons, most Latter-day Saints describe it as a burning in the bosom, which I know sounds, maybe someone's tittering or laughing there, and that's fine.
No, I'm just trying to figure. So I come from a Southern Baptist background, and while I was in, of course, I would have claimed that I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit, which is similar to what you're claiming. And what I'm trying to get to is, what does that feel like, and how do you know that what you're feeling is the presence of the Lord?
Well, I have a wife, and I describe it almost as I would describe love. I look at my wife, and I can look into her eyes, and she's a beautiful woman. And not that her beauty is all that matters. I'm attracted to her spirit as well.
Sure.
But I suppose it's like that, where it's almost like intuition, or what the detectives call on those detective shows the gut instinct.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Not only am I doing an entire magic show about intuition and exposing it, but so you feel something for your wife, and I got no problem with that.
Yes.
Now you feel something for the Lord as well, and you say that's
well, and that, yes, sir, and we
so.
believe.
But how do you know?
God.
How do you know that the object of that feeling is real?
Well, we have the Book of Mormon, which is another testament of Jesus Christ.
Okay. So first of all, I wasn't impressed with the first one that claimed to be a testament of Jesus Christ. I'm definitely not impressed with the fraudulent one. But
okay. Well, now have you read the Book of Mormon for yourself, or did you just see the Broadway show?
No, I've never seen the Broadway show. I read the Book of Mormon and was talking about Mormons long before South Park ever did an episode on it. What I'm asking, is it possible for someone to be in love with and have warm feelings for someone or something that is not real?
Well, I can put it this way. I really love... Have you seen the movie The Rock? It has Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
Now I love that movie, but of course it's make-believe. It is a movie, so I think you can love...
Is it possible for you to feel love for a fictional character, or even to feel hate for a fiction? Like, do you hate Voldemort?
Yes.
And you love Harry Potter?
Yeah. In fact, I will say I hate Ed Harris' character on The Rock. He's planning on gassing San Francisco.
Sure.
And of course, that's Ed Harris. He's an actor, and I understand the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Of
well,
course.
that's the issue here. The fact that you have feelings for something that for a God doesn't tell us whether or not the God is real, does it?
Well, and there are lots of false gods, Allah of the Muslims, and
how did you determine that Allah is a false god?
Well, think of the Muslims. They bombed us on 9/11.
Okay, but that doesn't tell me whether or not they have a false god.
Well, in Mormonism, we say, by their fruits ye shall know them.
Yeah, but all that means is that their God doesn't meet up to the standards of the God that you accept.
It doesn't make it false.
Yeah, I want to know which God is real, and how do we know that?
Well, in Mormonism, we have more than one. There's God the Father, God the Son, and then the Holy Ghost, and it's hard to describe.
I'm still just wondering how we tell which ones of those are real. I understand Mormon doctrine. My question is, how do you tell whether or not your God is real?
Well, we say it's a manifestation of the Holy Ghost.
What does that mean?
Well, it's brought upon by prayer, sincere prayer. You have to pray sincerely. You can't just go half-butt.
Yeah. So as a Southern Baptist, when I prayed sincerely, I felt something that I thought was a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. The doctrine is essentially indistinguishable. I found out that I had no good reason to say that because I feel this, the thing that I'm talking about is therefore true. So I need to find out, I can have all kinds of feelings.
And are you familiar with Joseph Smith? And he saw God and Jesus in...
I'm familiar with Joseph Smith as a con artist, and the claim that he...
That might be a misconception, sir.
Well, I don't think it is, but how do you know that Joseph Smith saw God?
I'm familiar that he claimed he did.
Well, now, that's kind of a tricky question. I mean, I wasn't there with a video camera or with my iPhone, but...
Okay. So somebody claimed that they met the angel Moroni.
Yes.
How do you determine that this is actually factually correct?
Well, fact isn't quite the right word.
It's the only word that I care about is whether or not it is a fact. You just mentioned faith. Is there anything that you couldn't believe based on faith?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay, so let's say I could believe that black people are superior to white people and say that this is a faith-based belief, right?
Well, you could, but you'd be wrong.
Well, so I could also believe that there is an invisible set of pixies that invade my home and make it filthy every night. And I could say that that position is based on faith, right?
Well, you could. You could have faith in pixies or in Allah. Or,
Sure.
I mean, you
so
could.
if faith can lead us to true conclusions and false conclusions, then faith is not a reliable mechanism for finding the truth, right?
Ooh. Well, Joseph Smith taught that the first principle of the gospel is faith in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Why should anybody care what Joseph Smith taught? And if what he taught is that the first principle is faith, and faith is in fact not a reliable pathway to truth, then doesn't that make Joseph Smith irrational? And doesn't that make his teachings false?
Well, and he grew up in a different time. You know, he didn't have computers. And
So hang on a second, Jeff. What difference does it make what time somebody grew up in? Faith is never been, and I don't see any reason why it would ever be a reliable path to truth, correct?
Well, in Smith, you know, he probably wouldn't have known much of what we know. I mean, we know that, you know, if you get sick, you should take a Tylenol. Joseph Smith probably didn't have a Tylenol. That's why he had to require on prayer.
Well, first of all, we can test prayer. We know that it's not particularly effective. That's not effective at all.
No.
But that doesn't address the question. Is faith a reliable pathway to truth?
True faith, yes.
Okay, now we're into an area of special pleading that is just beyond bizarre.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be guilty of logical fallacies. I was listening to the last call, and the young man talking about voodoo, and my eyes about fell out of my darn skull. It was so.
So you've introduced a new concept. So faith, set aside true faith for a second. Mm-hmm. Faith isn't a reliable path to truth, correct?
Well, probably not, because it's probably a lot like voodoo.
So, but now you're saying that true faith is a reliable path to truth. What is true faith, and how do you know it's a reliable path to truth?
Oh, it almost sounds like a redundancy, but It
sounds very circular. It sounds like you're saying the faith that leads to truth is a reliable path to truth.
Yeah, or even I use faith to be faithful, or I have faith in the faith of the faith. I understand what you mean now.
Because Gabriel was had just as much faith in his voodoo than you do in Joseph Smith.
Yes, and we don't have voodoo. We have what's called the Melchizedek priesthood, but between the three of us, they sound quite similar, maybe just different names. So maybe the power of God is manifest in different ways. Maybe that's the point.
So as soon as you start doing maybes, what you're engaged in is a little bit of retcon, a little bit of revising. It's a little bit of, let me see if I can find a way to keep making this work, rather than acknowledging that the foundation you started with is unreliable. Because if faith is unreliable, and Joseph Smith makes an appeal to faith, then Joseph Smith is encouraging an unreliable mechanism for finding the truth, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you've given me about 100 pounds to think about here.
Yeah, and then you get to the issue with the seer stones and the fact that the language that he claimed to be transcribing isn't real and doesn't exist.
Well, and I did some research on that, and that is true, that there is no such thing as the Reformed Egyptian.
Yeah.
That it doesn't exist outside of Mormonism. I am aware of that controversy.
Isn't that foundational to your beliefs? If the founder of your beliefs is claiming to have translated... Jeff, let me finish the sentence. Jeff, let me finish. No. The foundation is not Jesus Christ.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The foundation of Mormonism is the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
Okay, and how did the Book of Mormon came about? From Joseph Smith claiming that he was translating Reformed Egyptian, right?
Well, that's what the world would believe. I believe that God spoke to the ancient prophets, and that they wrote their words down on gold plates, and that centuries later Joseph Smith had those plates. That's what I believe.
Joseph Smith claimed he was translating Reformed Egyptian, right?
Yes.
And there's no such thing as a Reformed Egyptian, right?
Well, not outside of Mormonism, no.
Not anywhere. You don't get to just go to special pleading and say that all of a sudden there's Reformed Egyptian within Mormonism. I know that your religion is going to make it difficult for you to acknowledge that the founder of your religion was a big fat liar, but he was.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel a lot like the last caller trying to defend voodoo. I tell you what, Jeff, yes.
Go think about those things, because you've clearly already researched a little and you're desperate to find a way to make this work.
Yeah.
But
and if you can, Matt, and I believe John, see the Book of Mormon Broadway show. It was excellent, incredibly funny, very blasphemous, and then read the Book of Mormon. That would be my invitation to you gentlemen.
Well, I have not seen it. I don't know if I'll get to see it. I did see the South Park episode, but I'd already read the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And the problem here is that, and I don't mean this to be insulting to you.
And see The Rock. The Rock is excellent.
I've seen The Rock. My wife loves it. It's not particularly a great movie, but it is a fun movie.
Okay.
I have enjoyed it. But here's the thing, and I don't say this to be insulting to you. There are a lot of different religions.
Oh, you betcha.
Yeah, some of them are more obviously not true than others. When L. Ron Hubbard basically invented Scientology,
he was a maniac.
Yeah, see, he just kind of pulled it out of his butt, right?
Oh, right out of there.
And Joseph Smith pulled Mormonism out of his butt via seer stones and a hat.
Well,
it is the second most obviously fraudulent invented religion on the planet right now that I'm aware of.
Well, and I would just say it's easier to tell a fraudulent religion the newer it is.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. We have a really good history. In 2,000 years, when the Mormon Church has been successful in destroying and hiding the path of evidence, if they're able to do that, then Mormonism might be as popular or more popular than mainstream Christianity, because now you won't have as much access to the evidence that shows that it's not real.
Oh, well, like I said, you've given me about 100 pounds of information not information, but I guess doubt is the word to think about.
Doubt's a good thing. And here's the thing, if Mormonism is true, if Mormonism turns out to be true, then the doubt that leads you to discover the facts, to demonstrate why it's true, not only means that you now have a more rational position, but it's a position that you would be able to share. You could call in here, you could convince anyone that Mormonism is true, without logical fallacies, without appeals to Reformed Egyptian, without...
Yes, I really walked into some of those, and I didn't mean to be circular, but the Mormons, they're just such good people, and I guess
I'm fine with the idea that they're good people, except for one thing. I know a lot of former Mormons, ex-Mormons. We call them formans.
Apostates. Yes.
Well, you can call them apostates. I like calling them human beings. I'm sorry, that did sound harsh. They are children of our Heavenly Father. You're right. No, they're in the worst shape because they were Mormons and now they're not. They're in far worse shape according to Mormon doctrine than I am, because I was never a Mormon, right?
Yes, outer darkness.
Yeah, so they are the worst of the worst. They have the worst course. Here's the thing. Mormons, great people, great families, awesome, friendly, except for one thing. The church encourages and requires them to present that front to the world, because the reputation of the church is impacted by their actions. And so there are plenty of miserable Mormons who are living in the worst mental conditions because they are stuck in something that is not true, that is oppressive, and yet they have to pretend as if everything is okay, because that's what the church demands. And that to me is repugnant.
Well, I'll put it this, I'm sorry that you feel that way. And you're right. I shouldn't just refer to my fellow brothers and sisters as apostate. I said apostate. That's not.
Well,
that's
it
not
might be
my
factually accurate based on your doctrine, but here's the thing: if you were to find out that there were a bunch of miserable, unhappy Mormons who were pretending to be happy for the sake of promoting the church, would you have a problem with that?
Well, yeah. Happiness is one thing, but for me, truth is more important.
Yeah. So I would start talking. I would reach out to former Mormons, and then start talking to other Mormons, because the things that they'll talk about in private are very different from what they'll talk about in public.
Well, and I haven't been to the Mormon temple yet, so I don't know what goes on there yet. I'm a new convert.
I'm pretty sure the bloodletting no longer occurs there, but you should look into the history of that as well.
Yeah, well, I've been a little worried, I'll be honest.
But I want to applaud you, Jeff, for thinking about this stuff, because a lot of people won't. They won't examine their beliefs. They won't examine what they think and why. So I think the fact that you're willing to shows me that you're more rational than a lot of people in your church or in other churches.
Not to toot my own horn, but I'm college educated. I have a degree in English education and in American government education. I teach 7th grade. I'm no dummy.
Yep.
So maybe I need to rethink a few. And critical thinking is good. Good belief. That's why we have. Here I'm on my cell phone. We have cell phones because people, they think, it'd be nice to call my friend in Texas, or I'd like to call my mother, and I can't just throw a stone here with a string or a tin can. A tin can won't quite work.
Anyway, Jeff, I appreciate the call. Do some critical thinking, re-examine. Don't be afraid of doubts, because the truth has nothing to fear from investigation.
That's true. Okay, thank you, sirs. Have a great Sunday.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
As a reminder, it is Sunday, which means the Atheist Experience is on, which is what you're watching now, unless you're watching the recording sometime in the future, in which case it could be any time, any day. But if you're watching it live, when the show's over, we get together for dinner at Star of India restaurant. I think it's like 2900 Anderson Lane. They'll put it up at the bottom of the page. Boom, I got it right, 2900 West Anderson Lane.
I still don't see how you point, because it's backwards from...
It is backwards, but I can also see you, so I know it starts with in front of you and goes in front of me. It's taking in the whole picture. No, it's 12 years of doing the show and getting it wrong over and over.
That helps.
Look, right here, it says after show. After show, yeah.
But yeah, come to dinner with us after the show.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We've got a couple of atheist callers as well as a theist. I want to get at least one atheist caller on today. Yadaira in St. Cloud.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Thanks for
great.
waiting so patiently.
Hi. No problem. Okay, so I originally had two different questions, and then Jeff got on the phone. I'm technically still a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I haven't sent in my letter, but I'm an atheist. That's what I identify as. I'm still kind of transitioning between theism and atheism.
I wish we could have put you and Jeff on. We technically we could have
put you. I was over here screaming my head off.
Yeah, we have that capability. It's just that I didn't know you were on the line.
Oh my gosh, I would have loved that. But I wrote down a couple points that I wanted to touch on that Jeff said, because I heard what he was saying and I was literally screaming. So first of all, the Book of Mormon play is hilarious. Definitely check it out. I'm going to actually watch it live in a couple months. Really hilarious, and that's actually probably how my doubt started, which is kind of funny, was watching the Book of Mormon and being like, okay, they're not really saying anything that's not true. It's just the way they're saying it is really ridiculous. And then I was trying to be a better Mormon, study the church, and realize it's horrible and not true at all, and Joseph Smith's a fraud.
And when you talk about their by their fruits you'll know them, which exists in various Christian doctrines. I love the fact that, colloquially we refer to it as the Mormons. Jeff correctly identified it as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often just abbreviated LDS. But then there's also the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. And that's where you have the polygamy and the child brides. What's that?
Exactly. The polygamy, child brides, incest, a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And when I was a member and people would be like, oh, you still practice polygamy, I'd be like, oh, but they're not real Mormons.
Yeah.
And now I just kind of laugh when I hear people use the, but they're not real Christians, not real Muslims argument, because I'm like, at the fundamental, they kind of are. So, but what he was saying about like faith in the spirit and how it feels like I was indoctrinated. So for me, when I was growing up, I was like, oh, the spirit is this magical feeling. It's not. It's really just what you make up in your own head. Like, that's really what it is. Like, I thought I was really, feeling the spirit when I'd be like praying and asking for guidance and stuff. But in reality, I made all those decisions on my own because I knew it was good enough for me. But it kind of helped me like shift the burden, like shift the worry and shift the guilt to like this imaginary being in the sky. So that's what,
when I was asking him about, can you believe false things based on faith or internal things, how many young girls are absolutely in love with and think they're going to marry Justin Bieber?
Exactly.
It can't all be right.
Whenever you were talking about the faith thing, and he said, Allah is not a real God, there are members of the church who will tell you, oh, Allah is the same God that we worship, just under a different name.
Yep.
Like, people manipulate the doctrine however they want. And a lot of what people don't realize is that Mormons are low-key polytheistic. They really do believe that there are multiple gods, but that there's one penultimate God, and that's the one we need to worship. Because in Mormon doctrine, we all, if you don't know, it says that when you die, if you are faithful, you get to be a god, and you get to have planets. And I thought that was so cool as like a 12-year-old kid. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, how did I believe this stuff?
And my planet will have unicorns.
Exactly. I was like, my planet's going to have dinosaurs and people living at the same time. That's just how it's going to go. But they're going to be nice dinosaurs.
But if you're a woman, right, you just get to bear children for the god, right? My wife grew up in Utah, and I've heard some stories, but it didn't seem like the women got a very good deal out of it.
I think that one thing about this doctrine, one thing about this particular doctrine of getting to be a god, that I don't know why it doesn't resonate with Mormons more clearly. The book I'm currently working on is called If I Were God. And I talk about this in there, about what kind of world would you make if you were in fact God? So we get into like the problem of evil, or egregious evil. Hey, on my planet, cancer will not be able to affect children. I mean, I would love to just, hey, my planet's just not going to have cancer. But at a minimum, you could say cancer won't affect anyone under the age of 17.
Right.
And if that's the case, then does that not mean that I am better and more moral than the God that is currently in control of the planet that I inhabit?
Exactly. That's what I've been telling. I've only come out to a few of my very, very close friends and my boyfriend. I haven't come out to my family or anything like that because they're all still very, very devout, very, very Mormon, especially my dad and my stepmother. But the people I have told, I'm just like, this stuff doesn't make sense. Like, why would this all-powerful God, let there be wars and famine and people and like children dying of cancer and leukemia and things like that? Like, that was the first thing that I was like, you know what, maybe this doesn't make sense. Maybe I need to look into this more. And it all started with like just little bits of doubt here and there. And then I saw the Book of Mormon play and I was like, holy cow. And then actually my boyfriend's an atheist. And he would sometimes play y'all's show in the background when we would hang out. And I kind of would start listening to some of the arguments that these theist callers were making. And I was like, holy cow, that's the argument I've made. And it sounds absolutely ridiculous. And I think Stephanie, the first caller, was talking about cognitive dissonance and how atheists have cognitive dissonance. But in my mind, the only people showing their cognitive dissonance around here are theists because, they believe in this holy book that says that we should stone and kill homosexuals and women who talk back to men. Like in Stephanie's religion, her whole conversation would be deemed inappropriate by many Christians.
Oh, good point.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and the other aspect of this, I forgot. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of funny that, especially being raised in the Mormon church, I definitely will admit firsthand that I had tons of cognitive dissonance, and I was trying to justify how I've always loved science, and I would try to justify how evolution, I'm like, there's so much proof, so it has to be a part of God's plan, or else he wouldn't have done it this way. And I would try to justify, like, oh, the universe is expanding because that's just the way God wanted it to be. So I was just trying to. I'm actually studying astrophysics, and that's another reason why I've kind of lost my faith. And I'm just like, no, that's not how it works. There's not,
Yeah, well,
as far as I know, there's not a God saying that the universe is going to expand now just because I say it is.
yeah, well played. I will say that I didn't actually address Stephanie's point on cognitive dissonance because there was so much of it apparent in the discussion. But I will say that the only way you can have cognitive dissonance is to be simultaneously holding contradictory positions. And you know what the cure for that is? Acknowledging that the right answer is, I don't know. The very thing she objects to makes you immune on those subjects to cognitive dissonance. I cannot have cognitive dissonance when I'm not holding a positive position towards something. But I wanted to get to your question because you're kind of looking for, help transitioning or whatever else.
So I have lots of friends and family who are still very active members of the church. I have some who are just active Christians and other religious beliefs. And I was just kind of wondering, what to expect when having these conversations with my still very, very devout friends and family. How can I go about being like, look, this is why I don't believe, and this is why I don't, or maybe, why shouldn't you, but you shouldn't believe this either.
Yeah. So the first recommendation I have is Greta Christina's book, Coming Out, The Reasons Why and How to Do It. That's roughly the title, but coming out as an atheist is the theme. You can just search for Greta Christina. She interviewed a bunch of people. The thing is, everybody's experience is going to be a little different. I know people who have lost their entire social structure. Their families have been kicked out. They've lost all their friends, and it is awful. And some people have suffered from what Dr. Marlene Winnell has called religious trauma syndrome. The thing that I recommend is, I don't see any reason to make a big deal out of it. To do a sit down. Okay, I have an important announcement. I don't believe. Instead, if you continue being you, and then gradually become a little more open and honest, so that when the questions start coming of hey, do you still believe this? You can say, yeah, I haven't believed this for a while. I'm still thinking on things, but I don't believe that. That's a lot less terrifying to people than saying, I'm an atheist and you're wrong.
I'm an atheist, hear me roar.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I just had one other question. I know, the ACA has been around for a long, long time, but do you have any tips on starting a smaller community, in your own cities, for example? I know, obviously, Facebook would be probably the first facet, but do you have any other tips on that?
ACA started just with a few people, a newspaper ad, and some people getting together in a bagel shop, and that's kind of how it started. And you look for like-minded people. You just start meeting regularly if you can, and and go from there. And
I'd look to see if there's already groups in your area.
I'm sure there is.
It may take some effort.
Yeah, there's a couple. They're still really small, but I'm trying to inject my way in there.
Yeah.
You can look at meetup.com. There's generally free thought groups everywhere. They might have different names.
Yeah, there's Central Minnesota Freethinkers I found with a quick Google search here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I'm a part of that group, actually, so
Okay.
I'll have to hop in with you. All right, well, thanks so much, guys. I'm a huge fan of the show. I've been watching older episodes, too, and it's just great to catch up on all the stuff I've missed out on. So thanks a lot, and thanks for letting me on the show. Big fan. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Yadaira. All right, we've got 7 minutes left. There is one theist left, which I'm going to go ahead and take, Stanley in Columbus, because I was just in Columbus not too long ago. Are you there?
Yes, Matt. Hello. Hi, John.
Hey, Stanley, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Matt, it's an honor to speak with you. Let me say, long-time listener, first-time caller. Colin, going through a lot of things. Been checking out this Mandela effect. And normally, any type of conspiracy, BS, I'm very skeptic on most of it. But this Mandela effect, have you guys checked any of this out?
The Mandela effect, you're talking about people collectively misremembering things?
Exactly. I mean, everything from popular, the Ford emblem's different now. It has a little squiggly thing on the F that was never there before. Procter and Gamble is spelled different. And there's hundreds. Fruit Loops is spelled with the double O's and the fruit instead of being spelled right. And there's just so many of them. I mean, crazy. Michael Jackson, Smooth Criminal. Now the lyrics have changed all of a sudden. And it's just, insanity how many things. And it's I mean, I'm a fairly intelligent, college-educated man. And yes, I do struggle with whether I believe in something beyond our measurable reality. But usually I'm skeptical when it comes to anything. And so I was wondering, since you guys are pretty big skeptics on everything, what if you've looked into it and what you're maybe thinking about it?
People make mistakes. Your brain adjusts memories. So one of the things, when I'm doing this show up in Vancouver, I'll be talking a little bit about intuition, and I'm going to be doing an effect that relates to the Stroop effect, which is where you have a bunch of words of colors, but like the text will say red, but the font will actually be green. So when they match up and you read, so when they match up, you can read through them quickly. When they don't match up, when they're incongruous, it takes longer. It requires a little more effort. There's a number of different hypotheses.
The heuristic memory doesn't know how to pull in the appropriate information. I understand that. I really do. But some of these things are creepy.
Okay, so then there's the other thing that I was going to talk about, which is that spelling doesn't matter, that if you keep the first letter and the last letter in a word and jumble the rest of it, you can still read it. You can find examples of this out on the internet. Our brains are curious things, and we know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. I'm hearing a lot of noise in the back.
I'm sorry.
Have you turned the show off so that I'm getting...
Yeah, the show's off. Yeah, I can just hear you on my phone.
Okay, so... we know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. We know that people invent memories. We know that shared memories can be invented. I'm not quite sure what you're... So there's all kinds of examples of this, which is how it got labeled to the Mandela effect. But I'm not sure what you're looking for as far as us addressing it.
Oh no! See, even like with the actual namesake, Nelson Mandela. I remember. I can tell you the classroom I was sitting in when we sat and watched his funeral on TV. I remember people wearing the shirts with the 6664, which was his prison number. I remember the Oprah show. I remember sitting in his class discussing about how it's changing South Africa and the end of the apartheid and all that. I remember all that.
So during a recent debate, my opponent was talking about how everybody remembers they were on 9/11. And interestingly, there's a study of people over the course of a decade. And it turns out that after 10 years, only 50% of the people are correct about where they actually were on 9/11. This is the malleability of our memory. However, this is the important thing to not lose sight of, because I hear people talk about things like the Mandela effect and the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, and then think, holy crap, that means we could just be wrong about anything and everything, and that we probably are. The problem here is that we're not likely to be significantly wrong about everything, but the fact that we are able to identify instances of the Mandela effect means that we are still able to go out and verify someone's memory against the actual occurrence, which means we haven't lost the actual occurrence. The information is there. The only thing we should take away from this is do not be so enamored with your own thoughts and ideas and your own memories, even things, especially perhaps things you've been saying for years. Instead, go out and research and find out the answer. And occasionally, it's good to, much the same way I would rewatch a movie I saw 10 years ago and may not remember much of it. In some cases, it's good to go back and reread a book, reread an article, restudy a topic.
I understand, Matt, and I do this. I'm skeptical. I go back and I look. Life is like a box of chocolates. Yet it never says that in the movie, but you can find it in commercials. You can find it in all kinds of other things. You can find Tom Hanks saying it, just like Luke, I am your father. Does not happen in Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what...
Even James Earl Jones talks about it, Like, he remembers filming it and all of that.
Well,
stuff like that freaks me out.
Sure, the problem here is that, yes, he doesn't say, Luke, I am your father, but he does say, I am your father.
Yeah, he says, no,
so
I am your father.
So what we're talking about in this instance isn't somebody getting something specifically wrong that's significant. It's about them embellishing a story and misremembering. We're coming up on the end of the show, and I'm trying to get to what it is that you want us to address.
Well, you actually did. I mean, honestly, I'm just somebody who tries to figure things out constantly, and this is one thing that's just baffling my brain on how this is happening. I mean, significantly I mean, and yes, I understand false memories, shared memories. I understand it, all of that. But there's still something that just, I mean, even when like physicist John Ellis from CERN is talking about some of these points, like he's even buying into the, drinking the Kool-Aid now on the Mandela effect.
Which, by the way, it's not drinking the Kool-Aid.
But yeah, just like James Gate also has talked about, he's a physicist and talks about how now the code that they comes up with at the most finite in string theory, when they the most finite code to explain it turns out to be ones and zeros, and a specific set of ones and zeros that we use for web browsers, which is very, very, very creepy.
So you took a step there where we were talking about the Mandela effect, which doesn't boggle my mind at all. People are imperfect thinkers. People are imperfect rememberers. And as we begin to share stuff, the idea that I am your father converts to Luke, I am your father, is wholly unsurprising to me. But now you're talking about ones and zeros in string theory that relate to web browser. I think that you've taken a step or two off in a direction that I couldn't possibly address with 0 minutes left in the show. So,
I understand, Matt.
On that note,
thank you for taking my call anyways.
Yeah, thanks a lot for calling.
You guys have a great day.
We'll let you go.
You too.
So that's
memory's weird. The more you learn about memory, the less I trust anything that I think I remember without checking it out. It's like
it's about, this is why I like this example that I was talking about, where you can, if you keep the first letter and the last letter of a word and jumble everything else up. It's weird coincidence that we were talking about this actually before the show, and it relates directly to this. Your brain still reads it because your brain processes words and not letters. And also, your brain thinks in concepts. And so, Luke, I'm your father, and I'm your father, not really different. He's talking to Luke. The fact that you've injected some extra information in there isn't significant. If it became popular that the phrase was, Jeremiah, I am your sister-in-law, that'd be pretty impressive. I mean, that would be an impressive shift that we would need to justify. But what we might find is that somebody made that as an internet meme, and it became more popular in 70 years than the Star Wars movies were at that time. But the nice thing is that you've got them on Blu-ray, and you can go back and watch them as long as you keep your Blu-ray player for the next 70 years. On that note, we're done with the show. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes who makes the show happen, the people who are doing the real work. Thanks to John and our studio audience. South by Southwest is going on here in Austin. We'll be going to Star of India Restaurant here just shortly after we clean up the studio. Around probably 30 minutes or so, we'll start eating there. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come down and join us. You don't have to be a member to attend. And you can find out more information about how you might be able to watch the show live from the other side of the glass, like all of those people are doing. I won't be here next week, but I'm sure there will be a great show for you to watch then. And until then, we'll see you later.
Bye, folks.
This is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.